buen día, bienvenidos, bienvenidas. Qué placer empezar este segundo día de nuestro Seminario Internacional de Aprendizaje Servicio número 23. Welcome, it is great to see you again today. I will do my introduction in Spanish first and then in English. Les decía, qué gran alegría empezar nuestro segundo día. Qué bueno volver a verlos. Ayer tuvimos 1079 personas escuchando la apertura del seminario, escuchando a la profesora Tapia, compartiendo estas primeras cuestiones vinculadas al aprendizaje servicio, a la educación, a la solidaridad. Y hoy, en este segundo día, en la mañana de este segundo día, vamos a tener un nuevo panel vinculado a la educación para la solidaridad, su importancia y demás. Después de eso vamos a tener una conversación relajada entre amigos y amigas que vienen trabajando en aprendizaje servicio. Seguramente los conozcan ya y las conozcan ya, así que va a ser un placer tener una conversación relajada entre todos. Esperamos que muchos de los amigos que estuvieron ayer de Kenia, de Sudáfrica, de Ucrania, de Bosnia y Herzegovina, de Colombia, de Chile, de Uruguay, de México y de tantos otros países, y por supuesto del interior de Argentina, estén hoy con nosotros nuevamente. Seguramente van a empezar a aparecer acá en YouTube. Recuerden que pueden ver por YouTube todas las presentaciones sin ningún problema, y quienes se hayan inscrito han recibido también el link para las sesiones simultáneas que tendremos a la tarde. Que tengamos un gran día, que tengamos un gran seminario y ojalá la pasen súper bien como la venimos pasando nosotros. Welcome to our 23rd International Service Learning Conference. This is day 2. We know that many of you were yesterday in Professor Tapia's presentation and in the opening of the event. We had participants from Ukraine, from Bosnia-Herzegovina, from Romania, from Colombia, Chile, Uruguay, from different parts of Argentina, from Mexico, from Guatemala, Honduras, from lots of countries. It was great to have you all there, and we are really expecting to see what will happen today. We will have two sessions this morning. The first one on educating for solidarity with specialists in that field. It will be surely very interesting. And then in the second part of the morning, we will be having a relaxed conversation with some friends and specialists in service learning. If you registered for the conference, then you should have received the link to the session that you have chosen. So, well, we expect that you will have a great time, that you will enjoy the conference as much as we are doing, and we expect to see you around. Bem-vindos. No puedo hacer la presentación en portugués, pero sepan que que estas sesiones van a estar siendo traducidas al portugués y al inglés, así que busquen el canal que les resulte mejor. Muchas gracias, un placer estar con ustedes nuevamente, que disfruten este segundo día y nos vemos en los pasillos.
Good morning to you all. Thank you for joining us today. The truth is that we are very proud to be able to introduce to you 4 people who are going to join us for these panels, 4 thinkers who will illustrate us, who will teach us in this plenary session on the importance of educating in and for solidarity. I will be the moderator for this session, so please try to stick to the time allotted to you, 20 minutes. When you are left 5 minutes, I will let you know. So let me introduce Axel Rivas first. The 4 people with us are Axel Rivas, Lynn Barendsen, Alberto Croce, and Josep Puig. And I'm going to give the floor to Axel Rivas first, who is the director of the University of San Andrés, and he is a lecturer and a researcher. He is an academic director of applied education. He is the chair of the Education Quality Board of the Ministry of Education of Argentina. He has a PhD in social sciences from the University of Buenos Aires. He also has a master's degree from Flaxo. He has a degree in communication sciences. And he also was trained at the London Institute. He is the author of different publications, Lessons Learned from 7 Countries, Who Controls the Future of Education, among others. Among his most recent papers, he appears as a thinker in educational policy, and he is an editor for South America of the Education Policy Analysis Journal. So, Axel, the floor is all yours, and you have 20 minutes. Thank you so much, Sebastián. It is my pleasure to be here. I would like to thank CLAIS for organizing this new edition of the International Conference on Service Learning that is already a traditional event. Thank you for all the logistics. Thank you for the invitation. I'm just going to share with you a few thoughts in order to think about service learning within the context of the pandemics in this exceptional situation that we are living through, such a painful and uncertain situation that has suspended and left in a vacuum many activities that we had in the educational system as well as in other dimensions of education. So this has put us to rethink what we were doing. Now we are learning more than ever before. This is a painful learning process, but we are learning anyway. And it is a time of where we ask ourselves a lot of questions with some emerging paths. Some of us are going back to what we used to do. We are discovering new things, but we also rediscovering what we were doing before. We had forgotten things along the way in the past, so now we are going back to those. But we also need to consider the role of technology. So in these prevailing circumstances, we need to be capable of doing a different type of awareness, pedagogical awareness, so to speak. So what are some of the roles, some of the tasks that we can use in order to reestablish, to restore the academic and the pedagogical link? In one of my papers, I refer to this. All educators are working hard on all these issues, and I see 3 large group of students right now. A group that is maintaining a more fluent communication. Of course, they have lost something, but basically they have an internet connection at home, and at school they have some setup that allows them to attend classes, and they have lessons through Zoom, and the group of students is still together. There is a second group of students that do not have that kind of situation, but they have some kind of connection, and they connect to some type of virtual campus or platform. That virtual campus allows them to do some follow-up. It restores the follow-up on students. Perhaps they do homework. Teachers should be able to follow up on that homework or on the progress made by the students. There can be some feedback recorded somewhere. All assignments, all feedback reports would be stored in the same place. It is an asynchronous connection, but there is some level of visibility. Students are visible for their teachers. This is a new type of educational system. For those who work with distance learning, that is a more familiar environment. The third group of students, probably the largest one, and unfortunately the largest one, is the group that has no internet connection, may have just a temporary, a transient connection, and is receiving activities through different paths. Through WhatsApp, they are also replying through WhatsApp, and they are watching educational shows on TV, and they may have an intermittent connection. And WhatsApp is not something that allows them to have an ongoing communication. So I think that these three groups of students are facing dramatically different educational conditions, and I think that the greatest duty of the state today is to reconnect those that are on the margins, those that are left out, because this has to do with the right to education, connectivity, having an internet connection or a device to connect on the internet in order to establish that link, that connection with their teachers. So that is the first thought that I wanted to share with you in order to put things into a context now, because we see exponentially increased inequalities, because we already had some existing inequalities. So the role of the state now is even more important, and also in schools, the role of teachers. We hope that this period will be as short as possible, but we know that it will take some time to go back and to more normal conditions. And I was trying to put into words my observations with colleagues, and I call this the pedagogy of exception. And the pedagogy of the exception is that during this time, we need to be capable of going through a conscious process of selection, to apply certain criteria to selection. First, because we are going to select many, we are going to select fewer things. And secondly, because we cannot teach as we were doing in our face-to-face lessons. Or now with the virtual environment and with all these inequalities, we need to change our teaching method. We need to look at the curricular content that has to be shortened, and now we need to find new ways of teaching during the pandemic. We need to give it another twist. So what is the situation at home? What kind of learning experience are students going through? And the pedagogy of this exception has several movements. I think that the central one has to do with this shift towards teaching design. I think we need to be capable of focusing on sense, what makes sense. The content that we decide to convey now has to make sense, and it has to enable us to come up with activities that make sense, that can be owned by the students, that have to be acceptable, games, challenges, project-based assignments, problem resolution activities, and they need to have different layers. They shouldn't be expressed in one single way. They should be applicable to those that have an internet connection and those that do not have that internet connection. It is quite a complex system, but we need to move towards this kind of context where we can have enjoyment and sense in the activities, but we need to be realistic. We need to perhaps leave aside the disciplinary aspect because we have less time to teach, and therefore we need to leave aside the harder part of the content and make an emphasis on the experiential aspect of the learning process, working with more playful activities, knowing that we are going to lose some things, but we are going to win some others. And technology allows us to work with this, and now we see this disruption in the school order. And so this pedagogy also tries to take school to the home, and this shouldn't be painful because we already have a lot of pain because of the situation derived from the pandemic. So this has to be a more enjoyable experience at home. So this implies also changes and movements in the household. We need to have a more integrated audience. We know that the school always works with the homes, but usually students are at home in the building where the school is, so the rest of the family is left aside. So the activities that are presented to students, mainly the younger ones, have to have a parallel dialogue through two paths with the family, given directions, what they have to do with students, whether they need to help, and students, whether they need to tell the family what they have done, if there is some kind of activity together with the family. So now the school activity is focused on the family. And we need to promote learning strategies. We need to foster working with peers and the metacognitive learning. We need to teach self-learning strategies, time management strategies, how to organize the work, how we can manage all these multiple devices that we are dealing with, because students are no longer alone. They are learning in the context of their homes, of their families. So I was thinking about how we could transfer this to the field of service learning, because we always think about taking ownership of what we are doing in service learning, making sense with our work. We always consider the value, the social function of service learning, and also the sociological dimension of service learning. So I think that we have much room to work in order to make the most of this situation, to work on solidarity. Although we have to keep a distance, we know that this affects what we do in service learning, but we need to consider the new opportunities with digital technologies, how we can reach out to vulnerable populations, how we can claim respect for rights, we can map out communities that are in vulnerable conditions, how we can establish new distance work routines through tutorials or through mentorships, or what we can do using platforms such as WhatsApp, how you can help others. Mentorships can be a good way to provide the necessary support to the learning process. And another dimension that perhaps is not at the forefront, but rather at the background, that has to do with cultural awareness. That is the function enabled by service learning. That is the idea of educating students and teachers, training them as critical filters of society, individuals that can have a critical look at culture and can do social distancing exercises in order to recognize diversity, inequalities. And it is these deep training exercises that open the doors to service learning. This is like the biggest gate that is open, and it has to do with our look onto the world in an unequal world, a highly uncertain world. So from the field of education, we need to think critically and focus on social values, to advocate for dialogue, for the common good, establishing empathy with others, and keeping an open mind from an epistemological standpoint, from a humanistic standpoint, because we are now facing a world where it is easier to destroy than to build. We see entire governments of large countries that are focusing their political campaigns on the need to distract their enemies, the invisible enemies, with a more exclusive, discriminatory look. So I think that we have ahead of us a big challenge to build a fairer society with more solidarity, opening the doors to service learning. So thank you so much for inviting me to share my thoughts with you, and I hope that I have given you some food for thought. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this panel.
Excellent, Axel. You've really given us a lot of food for thought. Thank you so much. Now we are moving to the second speaker, Josep Maria Puig Rovira. He is honorific professor of theory of education at the School of Education of the University of Barcelona. He has taught different subjects related to moral education and education for citizenship. He's a member of the GRAN, the Member of Research on Moral Research, and the Association and the Center for the Promotion of Service Learning. He has written Moral Education in Mandatory Education, The Construction of the Moral Personality, Moral Practices, The Task of Educating, Service Learning, Educating for Citizenship, Service Learning, Education, and Civic Engagement. Josep, it's a pleasure for us to have you here, so you have your 20 minutes. Hello, thank you so much. Thank you, first of all, for having invited me to this seminar, and also thank you for your kind introduction. It's an honor for me to be here today, sharing this moment with you, and then with all the people that will be listening to this meeting. And I would like to send some greetings to Nieves, a great friend of mine, and I would also like to send greetings to all of you from my partners at the Group for the Promotion of Service Learning in Catalonia, Barcelona. So let's go then to the importance of educating in and for solidarity. I'm going to deal with three aspects that are present in the title that I think are very illustrative, and I'd like to describe them and introduce some idea. Let's get down to it. So first, the importance. The importance for education to deal with solidarity. And the truth is that today the term importance is quite soft. Perhaps we should speak of the need, of the necessity, the duty to educate in and for solidarity. So the urgency of educating for solidarity. Perhaps the title wouldn't sound so nice, but I would say that it's not only important, it's urgent to educate in and for solidarity. And why is that? Why is it urgent? I think there are several reasons. First, we all are aware that we are in a crisis, in a systemic crisis of the civilization. Let's see how we get out of this. But it's a situation that nobody remembers having been in a situation like this before. We have a huge climate crisis that forces us to change everything. Second, we have an exacerbation of inequalities and all the problems caused by inequalities. And third, a direct attack to democracies, or at least a strong attack against them. And well, COVID is here, but we have no idea how to deal with it and how long it's going to stay with us. So we are in a situation of crisis, and we all know that there are no individual solutions for it. The solutions those solutions tend to aggravate the problem. So we have to find ways of collaborating, ways of working in solidarity. When we have a crisis, we have to combine efforts to produce a collective force. So we could speak a lot about that. And this is something that can be taught. I mean, this way of understanding solidarity can be taught. And we have to try and do it. And that's why I think it's not only important, but it's urgent. But there's another reason, I think. A second reason is that it's important today to work on the idea of solidarity to counteract the logic of the competitive individualism that is so prevalent in economy and in society. Neoliberalism has changed the economy and it's changing the human soul. But human beings, we know that they are not just interested individuals that are worried about competing and earning more. Human beings perhaps have a competitive part to them, but they are beings that are very interested and very able of cooperating, of helping one another, of working in a selfless way, and of course of working in solidarity. So it's important to educate for solidarity because it faces us with a logic that is now invading everything. But this has to be worked from education. It doesn't it's useless just to claim it. We have to do it somehow, because otherwise that will be suffocated. So that's a second reason why it's not only important, but it's perhaps urgent, as I said. And the third reason is that solidarity, in my opinion, is one of the four legs of an imaginary table, that is the ethics. This was explained by an important philosopher. He said, you know, ethics has four legs that are essential. One is solidarity. The other one is the care for the others. The third is dialogue. And the fourth is autonomy. It is true that a table with four legs is never quiet, but it's also true that there's no way to turn it down. And this makes us say, well, the idea is to build a moral personality that is capable of being supported by these four legs, that will be always moving, but will not turn it down. And these four legs, of course, includes solidarity. That is part of this comprehensive education that we were mentioning at the beginning. I think this leads us to a final detail. All values are important, but it's true that sometimes we say that some values are at some points more important or urgent than others. Of course, there are points in time when some things are more necessary. And what we've seen is that today solidarity is one of the values that is at the top of the list because it's urgent for several reasons. It's important to have it at the core of education. So my small contribution for saying that the title is very correct, and perhaps it should be more emphatic on the level of importance. The second part of the title says, educating in and for solidarity. This education has to be in and for solidarity. I think that this idea is very important because it's at the core of the better pedagogy. It's a basic structure of the better pedagogy. We may say this started mainly in the active pedagogy, and then all the pedagogies that are derived have included this idea at the core. And this is very simple. It means that the purpose of education, in this case solidarity, and the method, that is the way, have to propose the same thing. The purpose and the method have to propose the same thing. You cannot reach solidarity from through another path. If you want to form people in solidarity, you need to use a method that allows them to practice solidarity. If you want to form free people, they have to learn freedom. If you want to form active people, you have to make them feel able to move their heads and their hands, otherwise they're not going to be active. So method and purpose. they have to go to in the same direction. But there's more to that. If we have a valuable purpose, that is solidarity, we cannot learn it just anyway. We've just mentioned that. You have to design a situation of learning that allows you to test solidarity, rehearse it, exercise solidarity. Learn step by step how to have more solidarity. Service learning does that very well. We have a very powerful tradition in that sense. In this way, our students, as they repeat actions, civic actions of solidarity, they learn solidarity, but they also learn solidarity and they start liking solidarity, and those are two different things. You can master the procedure of solidarity, but you need to appreciate it. You have to acquire a value. That's a minimum of, that is, to acquire the competencies and to appreciate the value. But the problem is, how do you educate in solidarity? How to achieve that? The fact that our students appreciate that value. We know how to make them practice it, but how can we make them appreciate it? I think it's very simple. For a student to appreciate a value, they have to be side by side an educator that helps them appreciate that value. How can you do that? How can educators make their students appreciate a value? Well, basically, it takes three things. First, because they, as adults, they appreciate the value. If the educator doesn't appreciate it, they are not going to be able to transmit it. Then the teacher has to appreciate the students. To transmit that appreciation for value, the teacher has to appreciate the students as beings. And third, standing next to them and helping them think about the importance of that value. When those three things are achieved, then we can achieve what we want. That is education in and for solidarity, for people to own this value, to make it their own, knowing how to practice it, and being willing to do it and estimating it. And I think service learning, again, does that very well. It's a good methodology that allows us to educate for solidarity through a system that puts the youth in a situation of exercising that solidarity. And I would add, together with an educator that is side by side helping them. So in that case, we have success that is almost 100% ensured. The second aspect of the title was that I just covered. The third is solidarity and the importance of educating in and for solidarity. Well, here we start from what we said. Solidarity is very important. It's so important that it's urgent. But there's a problem there, and that is that the value of solidarity has been used in different ways, and perhaps it's worth taking a look and seeing which are more useful to speak of education, and particularly service learning. That is the topic of our meeting. There are several ways of understanding solidarity. The first is solidarity as belonging. That's a classical way. It's a feeling, solidarity is a feeling of companionship, of being willing to help one another among people that are members of the same reality. This companionship that is created among individuals that are part of the same reality. This reality may be a nation, a football team, a company, a religion, a party. Reality is anything. But we have solidarity with those that are part of our reality. This has some advantages, clear advantages. It helps having roots and feeling part of something and sharing something. So it has a huge socializing part, but it has some problems because sometimes this produces some blindness. We don't see beyond our reasons and our points of view. And it's difficult for us to see the reasons and the points of view of the others. And even sometimes it produces some confrontations, the famous we against them. something that the Senate in this last book has explained that very often. Solidarity as us against them. Well, this way of understanding solidarity is not the best one for education, I think, even if it has some positive aspects. It's not good for service learning either. The second is solidarity as adherence. That's another thing. It's the idea of expressing support, public support to a cause, to an idea that other people defend, to express support to an idea that others are defending. This expression of support is normally motivated because we think the same, there are some agreements, or because we believe that the cause deserves it. This idea of solidarity has a positive side. I mean, it's a fight against silence, against loneliness. It's a fight for those that fight for just causes. And it has its problems because, and recently this part has grown. There are many, many initiatives of signing a manifesto or a statement for this or that. The manifesto is signed and then nothing happens. Or repeating 1,000 times the same critical opinions that don't move anything. Isabel Stenger at some point said, the irrationality is not afraid of criticism. We have to go beyond criticism. So the other one is the famous tweeting from the couch, supporting all the causes. That's perfect. But it makes us more insensitive. But solidarity as adherence has had its moments. There is avoiding silence and oblivion. And the third idea of solidarity is solidarity as aid, as assistance. That is the specific assistance or aid to a group of people to mitigate a difficult situation. A specific assistance or aid to mitigate a problem. Normally, this solidarity is motivated by strong and clear empathy. To aid those that are in need, that's a humanitarian duty that cannot be argued. It has a clearly positive side to it, no doubt. But it's also true that sometimes these occasional aids do not solve the problem. And that would not be the worst part of it, but sometimes they even make it worse. And they humiliate the beneficiary. And sometimes they relieve the cause of that. So it has pros and cons. In education, we have used it a lot, and sometimes service learning is close to it. Anyway, my proposal is that for service learning and for education in general, perhaps it would be better to use the idea of solidarity as a common action. Solidarity as a common action. What do we mean by that? Solidarity as a common action refers to the participation with a high implication, involvement, and engagement, as high as possible, in a social process to improve the living conditions of a community. I mean, it's the involvement, the participation in changing things. It's not, there's nothing new about it. But it's important to understand that the idea of solidarity, we would like to see it as an exercise of engagement in order to improve things. This exercise, this process, has some moments, and we have to analyze them in more detail. But the first part of a process of this type requires us to turn a problem, a difficulty, into a collective challenge, so that we turn a challenge, a problem into a challenge, something that we try to overcome. That means that we start a process of grouping, bringing together, creating a group, and activating the joint capabilities of that group, normally working together. So, collective challenge. Second, creating a team and training it, educating it in the use of these joint capabilities, dialogue and work mainly. Third, designing a project. A project is not an action, it's a project, because normally changing a minor thing implies activating a long-term action that implies combining knowledge, techniques, values, and finally, the output of that project. That is something that is donated to the community. There's no consideration for this. It's just donated. And this is what I would like to understand as common action. Solidarity as common action. What happens is that we soon realize that this idea of solidarity as common action at the end of the day is the basic dynamism of life, of the growth of life, perhaps much more important than the idea of competition and the fight for survival of neoliberalism. Life has grown in all its aspects because there have been ways of solidarity and common action. One of the many defenders of this was Kropotkin, when in his book he spoke about mutual support as a factor of biological evolution. Or Byman that describes in The Protection of the Weak the confirmation of the beginning of a human community. A human community is a community that can protect the weaker. Or when we hear that cooperation is the engine of culture, what is the origin of culture? Based on studies with kids, it lies in cooperation. Or with Ostrom explains how are these common goods ruled, the aquifers, etc. Or finally, today, Torvald or Wells, how they have promoted in a cooperative manner a wonderful encyclopedia or Wikipedia or the operating system of Linux. So, solidarity as a common action shows us a central mechanism of life. And if that is true, there's no doubt, then we have to apply it in education. I mean, this mechanism cannot be outside the curriculum. It cannot be the core of education. It has to be the core of education. And I think that is what service learning contributes in a very mature way. Today's service learning, I think all of you that are listening to us agree and know that service learning is a powerful way of solidarity, well placed within the curriculum. We've seen it lots of times when the youth participate in a campaign to donate blood, or when our youth are involved in a citizen science group after a mosquito that has appeared in the city, or when they participate in the repair of a shelter to save the cultural heritage in the mountains, or these days when they've been in radio programs to inform their community. Several institutes have done this radio broadcasts. So what are we seeing in those cases? We see how service learning becomes a way of creating solidarity as a common action, as participation to change things, or engagement to change things. So I think service learning is a wonderful experience that achieves two things as opposed to the common action process, and that is to create community and to form subjectivity, that is an identity that allows the youth to be themselves in common and for the others, to be themselves in common and for the others. So that's what we are doing. That's why we often say that service learning is not a technique or a methodology. It's a pedagogy with its philosophy, and with a philosophy that tries to achieve the the youth can contribute to create a different form of life. And this is what I think can contribute this way of understanding solidarity. That's it. This is what I wanted to share with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joseph. Thank you for this clear presentation. Now, in this plenary session on the importance of educating in and for solidarity, let me introduce Lynn Barendsen, who is the project director at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. For more than 20 years, she was part of the Good Project, housed at Project Zero. That is a large-scale effort to identify individuals and institutions that exemplify good work, work that is excellent in quality, socially responsible and meaningful to its practitioners, and to determine how best to increase the incidence of good work in our society. Lynn and her colleagues are working to envision and secure the legacy of more than 20 years of work, its impact on educational research in the classroom, and within the broader conversation about developing responsible, caring, and balanced youth. Early in 2014, Lynn became the executive director of the Family Dinner Project. As one of the founding members, she was able to encourage and support families to consider some of the same questions considered by the Good Project, encouraging reflection and in the process enabling families to make the most of their meal times together. After graduating, she spent several years in the graduate school studying American literature at the University of Chicago and Boston University. She also published articles on African American and regionalist literature, social and business entrepreneurs, young professionals in theater and business, the elements of leadership, and with Howard Gardner, she co-authored a chapter on young workers in a global age. She led several workshops and presentations associated with good work. Lynn, you have 20 minutes.
Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be joining this important conversation and learning from all of you today. So I'm going to be talking about good work and service learning, specifically focused on responsibility and also community. A brief outline of what I hope to cover today. I'll start with a brief overview of the Good Project, talk about its history and our current work, some of the resources that we've developed. I will outline what that research covered over the past 2 decades, and then I'll highlight just 2 findings that I think are particularly relevant to our discussion. One around the concept of alignment or misalignment, and then the other around the concept of responsibility. And then I look forward to focusing on 2 sub-studies, small sub-studies, one on what we call caring workers, and a second sub-study about an assessment of a service learning program, which I think is particularly relevant. So the Good Project, as my introduction stated, it's an initiative at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, which is part of something called Project Zero. We ask a lot of questions, such as what is the meaning of good work or of doing good in the world? What factors support or hinder our ability to do good? What are the core values that guide your decisions and interactions with others? To whom or what do you feel responsible in your work? These are some of the questions we explore, and today I'm going to focus in particular on the relationship between good work and service learning. So for decades, my colleagues and I have been engaged in an investigation of what we call good work, trying to understand why it is that some individuals do what we call good work and others just work. So our definition has evolved, but our original understanding has remained consistent. Good work involves excellence, so it's work that is of high quality. It involves ethics, individuals care about the impact of their work, and it involves engagement, or people that find meaning in what it is that they do. Doing all 3 of these can be very challenging, but with supports such as mission alignment, mentoring, or reflective practices, it's certainly possible. Our particular understanding of work emerges from what was primarily a study of professions. However, what it means to be a good worker is not necessarily the same as what it means to be a professional. So many people in the traditional professions, such as law or medicine, for example, including those with higher degrees, are not necessarily good workers. At the same time, many people who have not been to college can be exemplary good workers, so it's not necessarily connected to the professions. The Good Project seeks to promote these 3 E's of excellence, ethics, and engagement, preparing to help individuals become good workers and good citizens who contribute to the overall well-being of society. We help people to reflect upon the ethical dilemmas and complexities that arise in everyday life, and we provide them with tools to make more thoughtful decisions. So how did this project get started? It began in 1995 as an investigation of how professionals do good work in practice. It was originally the work of 3 principal investigators: Howard Gardner, who is best known for his theory of multiple intelligences; Csikszentmihalyi, best known for his concept of flow; and Bill Damon, who is an expert on moral development and more recently has really focused his work on purpose. Together, these 3 developmental psychologists began a series of studies that would expand and extend into present day. So the question that occupied our attention of this research team for 2 decades, actually, how is it that some individuals who desire to do good work can succeed or fail at a time when market forces, those pressures for money, are powerful? There are few, if any, powerful counter forces, and our sense of time and space is being altered in a society that's really connected and driven by technology. These are questions that, even though we first came up with these questions in 1995, are still very much present today. This question inspired our research, and from it is where we developed our theory of good work. So how did we carry out our research study? It was a combination of both qualitative and quantitative analysis. Our qualitative work was comprised of extensive interviews of over 1,700 professionals in a variety of fields, including journalism, genetics, law, medicine, business, education, philanthropy, and theater. We interviewed workers who were just starting out in their careers, mid-level workers, and those who had a lifetime of experience and were nearing retirement. We also carried out interviews with young students who were 10 to 15 years old, and then another cohort that were 16 to 18-year-olds. These students were deeply committed to a particular activity, so they might see themselves going into that profession. So saw themselves potentially becoming musicians or journalists, for example. The interviews typically lasted as long as 2 hours. We asked individuals about their beliefs and values, their goals, their mentors, and other important influences in their lives. This qualitative work was supported by quantitative research in the form of a value sorting activity. We asked participants to sort 30 values in order of relative importance to them in their work. So across ages, stages, and professions, the values that consistently emerged as most important were honesty and integrity, and rewarding and supportive relationships. In order to support what we learned, we have published books, research papers, flexible toolkits which combine interactive activities and dilemmas drawn from our research, in which a person grapples with a difficult decision, often under stressful circumstances. These stories are meant to be discussed, reflected upon, and lead to hopefully better and wiser courses of action in the future. So for the purposes of our conversation today, I wanted to highlight just 2 of our findings. The first of these is around the concept of alignment or misalignment. So over time, we learned that those who work in fields that are in alignment, fields where all of the various interested parties share common goals, find it easier to do good work. Those who work in fields that are misaligned or going through turmoil find good work much more challenging. So consider, for example, the field of journalism. Who are all the interested parties in journalism? The journalists themselves, certainly, the news consumers, those of us who look for the news, but also stockholders, business owners, editors. There are many people who are concerned with what happens in journalism. Do they all want the same thing? In most cases, no. When we first did our study of journalism back in 1995, it was misaligned. And certainly in the United States, and I think all over the world, we can agree that journalism is still misaligned. So in these times, misalignment does not necessarily mean that good work is impossible. In fact, sometimes this can result in moments of great creativity. Misalignment, dislocation, in extreme cases, revolution. These are all terms that point to the turmoil that often happens before great periods of creativity and innovation. Of course, this is exactly the kind of moment we occupy. We're in a time when workers of all types, those in the traditional professions, white and blue collar workers, college educated and not college educated, share concerns about the future of work. A global pandemic has changed everything, but even before COVID-19, issues as diverse as the ascendancy of artificial intelligence, dramatic changes in climate, a population that is aging, and controversies around immigration touch most, if not all realms of work. So what are we going to do during this moment of disruption? Will we be able to meet it with creativity? And will that creativity involve good work? How can we support good work? The second finding I wanted to focus on is around responsibility. Often difficult decision-making comes down to questions of responsibility. In the course of our interviews, we asked one simple question: to whom or what do you feel responsible in your work? The most common responses included to myself, to my friends and family, to my colleagues, to my profession, to the wider world. There were other responses as well. Some individuals expressed a sense of responsibility to their religion, to an ideal, or sometimes to an ancestor or a whole generation of predecessors. We describe these various responsibilities as a series of rings around a bullseye. So the bullseye at the center represents the self, while rings further and further out from the center represent increasingly distant groups, from immediate contacts like family and friends, to workplace, to profession, and then to society as a whole. Interestingly, the younger individuals we interviewed during our study of good work, high school students, for example, typically talked just about those first two rings of responsibility: responsibility to self and responsibility to friends and family. It's important to note that the focus on the inner two rings, a sense of responsibility mostly directed towards oneself and immediate others, isn't necessarily selfish. It might simply mean that the individual conceptualizes their personal principles or closely held beliefs as integral to their identity, as most important. In any case, young people didn't believe that what they did had much impact beyond themselves, or at least didn't tend to think beyond these spheres. Only as individuals became older did they typically consider other spheres of responsibility, to colleagues, to the wider world, or to their professions. Of course, there were occasional outliers, young people who talked about a responsibility to make change in the world, or older professionals who didn't think about responsibilities to anyone beyond their immediate influence, but these were highly unusual. The rings of responsibility are another way to consider how people think about the ethical implications of their actions. As individuals understand wider impacts their actions can have on the elements represented by those outer rings, their commitment to behaving in an ethical manner often deepens. So the second finding around responsibility is particularly relevant to the two sub-studies I'm now going to focus on during the remainder of our time together. These are sub-studies that look at how those who work in service of others understand responsibility. The first of these is a small sub-study I conducted a number of years ago. To further understand notions of responsibility, I compared the differences in the views of responsibility carried out by two separate groups. The first of these is caring workers, so those who work directly in service of others and whose work directly benefits those others. So for example, teachers, medical professionals such as doctors or nurses, or social entrepreneurs, those who are working with a person and see that person on a regular basis. So teachers are working directly one-on-one with students. Doctors and nurses are with their patients. And social entrepreneurs are often working with the communities that they are trying to serve, whether it's a group of hungry or homeless or things like that. I compared this group of caring professionals to individualized professionals. So those who are in professions where work often occurs in offices where they're not seeing the people who are impacted by their work. For example, business people, lawyers, or journalists. Of course, there's not a very sharp line between these two individual groups. There's some crossover. Some social entrepreneurs have some business-like qualities. Some journalists and lawyers see themselves as working in direct service of others. But for the most part, there's an important distinction here between these two types a distinction focused on being with those who you serve. So what did I learn? The first is where to draw the line between personal and professional is often a source of conflict for professionals, especially now when so many of us are working from home. The nature of this conflict, however, is fundamentally different in these two groups. Caring workers do more than bring their work home. They risk caring too much and find it difficult to leave work at work. They carry their responsibilities with them above and beyond work boundaries, if indeed there are any work boundaries. For some, their personal and professional lives are guided by similar values. Sometimes these can be religious values, for example, and this can make personal sacrifices easier to bear. When faced with a choice between conflicting responsibilities, caring workers typically base decisions on the individuals or communities they serve. If it comes down to a choice between needs of student versus a supervisor at work, the student almost always comes first. And for example, putting the needs of the students, the individuals first, is understood as good teaching. That's what I'm supposed to do. So often there was less conflict in that decision making. So what are the takeaways? Thinking about responsibility helps us to uncover what we value in work. Caring workers understand their responsibilities differently than other workers do. Caring workers expressed a passion for their work and for the individuals they serve, whereas other workers expressed a passion for ideals, such as uncovering the truth, upholding the public trust, or the ideals of capitalism, for example. These are what motivated people. This is not to privilege one type of work or over another at all. Instead, the distinction points to the deeper understanding that's possible when we unpack differences in how we perceive our work and our responsibilities. If we have a number of individuals focused on ideals, while others are focused on people, our frame for making meaning is necessarily different. At least in our small sample, this had a direct impact on how workers found meaning and fulfillment when, for example, work became particularly challenging. The second sub-study I want to highlight is a year-long assessment of a 10-month service learning fellowship experience. This study provides additional learnings about the connection between responsibility and understandings of community. This small research project sought to determine if and how students were impacted by a 10-month fellowship experience. The Global Citizens Initiative brings 28 high school students ages 15 to 17 from 15 different countries together for a 10-day experience. In July of 2019, it took place in Tokyo, Japan. These students are responsible for the design and development of a service learning project that will be carried out over the course of a 10-month period. Supported by teaching assistants and mentors, this project is meant to be global, so addressing a global problem at a local level. So for example, one young woman worked to increase understanding and support of refugees of her hometown in Jordan by developing an art project whose proceeds would benefit local refugee families in need. Research included a pre-survey, open-ended reflective questions, classroom observations, and a post-survey carried out on the last day of the summit, semi-structured interviews that were carried out 7 to 8 months after the actual event. The study of this group has informed our understanding about good work. Specifically revealing is the relationship between how participants define their communities and their sense of responsibility. As already mentioned in previous good work studies of this age group, young people typically expressed responsibility only to themselves and to the immediate others, including close friends and family. By contrast, this group, this service learning group, articulates responsibility to a much wider circle, including their local communities, society at large, and the world. When we unpacked the reasons why they were so different from the more typical individuals in their group, the answers focused on how they understood their communities. Participants were clear about the ways in which the fellowship experience helped to build community amongst its participants. Relationships with peers and others at the summit were a highlight, if not the most valuable part of the experience. Let me remind you that these 28 participants came from 15 different countries. All spoke at least 2 languages, and many spoke a third or more. Learning about alternative perspectives, recognizing their own ignorances, these were all critical to opening their minds. participants reported that community formed in classrooms, shared responsibility for learning. They found a sense of communal interest, which many reported they did not have at home. And they found a sense of belonging that contributed to their sense of purpose. So in short, learning was communal. Learning was better because it was shared with a diverse group, and a shared sense of purpose helped to build that community. This expanded sense of responsibility expressed by these participants includes the new communities that they've identified. So this group feels responsible to itself, to friends and family, but they also explain that they feel responsibility to contribute to the world and to bring back what they've learned to home communities as well. Before the summit, 21% felt responsibility to society and the world. After this learning experience, 53% felt this responsibility. So in conclusion today, these two small sub-studies tell us quite a bit about how service workers understand responsibility. Although these are small samples, what we've uncovered is supported by the larger learnings from the GOOD project, and there are three. The first, how we think about responsibilities may well be connected to what we value in work. In other words, those who work in direct service of others focus on these relationships rather than the ideals of a profession. Second, those involved in service learning, at least in the case of one service learning experience, express a strong sense of community. This may well be related to that third E, engagement, and how they find meaning in what they do. They are engaged because they feel a part of something bigger than themselves and express a sense of belonging. And three, with that highlighted sense of community comes an additional sense of responsibility, specifically a responsibility to the community or communities of which they feel a part. I appreciate the opportunity to share these ideas with all of you and to learn from my colleagues on the panel. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Lynn.
Thank you so much, Lynn. It was very nice of you to share this with us. Now it's Alberto Croce's turn. Alberto is a friend, an old friend of our seminars. He's a teacher, a popular educator, as he wants to be called, executive director of the VOS Foundation, a member of the International Council of the Global Forum on Education, and currently he is part of the National Council on the Quality of Education of the Ministry of Education of Argentina. Alberto is a relentless worker and promoter of community projects, so it will be a pleasure for us to listen to you, Alberto. Thank you. Please unmute your mic. Is that okay now? So thank you so much, Sebastián. It's a pleasure for me to be here with all of you in this new seminar. It's a great joy for me, and whenever I can participate from anywhere, from a panel, in a lecture, or participating as just another member and listen to the rich experiences that I've always witnessed in the seminars. I made many friends at this seminar, so I'm very happy to be here with you. And today we are talking about this issue of educating for solidarity, which is a topic that, as Josep just said, it's a very important issue. It's a central issue. And the previous speakers have provided a good framework for what I was planning to share with you. Now, going to the crust of the matter, in this virtual seminar, here we have an audience made up of many teachers from different parts of the country and from other parts of the world that work on this issue, that are here to listen to us in this meeting, and they are taking notes, and they're trying to compare and contrast what they do with what we say or what we are sharing here. And what we share here is based on what you do, so it's like a weird dialogue, much more now than everything is virtual. Now I'm talking here and I just see a few of you at a time, so it's even more difficult. for me, and the challenges are even greater. So having said all this, I think that on the one hand, service learning has a curricular vocation because it intends to teach contents of the curriculum, the most varied contents, through service learning practices. That is how it started. Well, it had several origins, but it was one of the first approaches, how to teach math, science, geography, history, social science from service actions. That was the origin of this. But, of course, this went beyond that, as Josep just mentioned. Then it became this idea of educating on this value, solidarity in itself. So it goes beyond, without losing that dimension, it goes beyond that, because here we're speaking of service learning and not a moral teaching or teaching ethics. This is another thing, how to train in solidarity from an educational assignment of different kinds and from different subjects. But the thing is that, as I mentioned, this is not a moral or ethic discourse without recognizing the importance of that, but understanding solidarity as a personal attitude to life and to make that a practice. I mean, not talking about it, but in a way living that attitude. It's like the school generates situations that allow solidarity to be lived. Here, I would like to remind you of something I always mention, and you must have heard me say this in the past. I apologize for that. But the word solidarity is based on solidum. Solidum was the guarantor, the one that responded with their own wealth to what another person was going through. That is, they covered the bags of the other person if that other person couldn't meet that obligation. So he assumed responsibility for the other. The idea of solidarity is not related to compassion that is more affectionate. It's much stronger than that because we're more involved, more committed. Solidarity is not helping from outside. Solidarity is doing something for another person when that person cannot do it. That is the etymology of the word. This brings us to a situation in which that other that we assume responsibility for is, on the one hand, an individual, a human being, just like us, but that individual is also a group, a community. And now we, and I would say in Latin America and some other places, we see this as being in symphony with the planet, the common household, everybody's home, as Pope Francis would say. This idea of the collective home, this idea of the great economy in the deepest sense of the common house. And that symphony makes us be solidarity in that way because it puts us all in that position. So putting a student in this position of being formed in solidarity is putting that student in this struggle. This is what I would like to make evident. In order to do this, service learning, what it does is to make the student relate himself or herself with different actors. First, in contact with his or her community or part of his or her community. And it takes the student out of the school in a certain way and puts the student in a wider school, which is the true school. That's why I like this idea of removing the student from the school, because for me the school is the wider community beyond the walls of the school. So it opens that experience to the community and puts the student in contact with actors in the community, actors that have needs and actors that try to find a way of solving those needs of others. I mean, the student starts to find himself or herself or meeting these individuals that have some needs or different kinds of needs. And on the other hand, with those that try to offer an engaged solution to that need. So, in a way, the school makes it possible for the student to be in touch with individuals and organizations that are caring organizations. And so the students meet people that they can adopt as models for solidarity. So this is educating by showing and motivating from those that are acting in solidarity in a way. And this is very interesting because there's something there that is quite complex, but I think we have to say it like this. And I say it's complex because it's challenging also, and you will realize why immediately. That it's very difficult for a service learning project to be carried out by a teacher that doesn't believe in solidarity. Because solidarity, the solidarity of the teacher is what motivates the teacher to teach in this pedagogy. And that is a problem in a way. It's beautiful in a way, but it's a problem also, because not any teacher, if the teacher has not adopted solidarity as a value in his or her life, it's difficult for that teacher to teach in solidarity. That is a systemic weakness because it demands a certain kind of teacher. But the big strength, as I said in a previous talk, is that that is the strength of service learning. And that's why it cannot be defeated, because those that embrace this cause do it in a way that goes beyond the formality of the system itself. And this is not a formal commitment, it's a life commitment. And in a way, this is what has happened. I think that those that are committed to service learning are like activists of service learning. They're not just technicians or pedagogists. It's more than that. It touches our heart because it's a practice of solidarity. So beyond that, in a way, the students have to meet teachers that practice solidarity, individuals and organizations that practice solidarity that respond to needs in their community, to put it some way. So all this makes the service learning experience essentially a collective experience. And in that collective experience, besides, one of the things that the students learn is that there are different ways of responding to the other's needs. There's no single answer. Solidarity is not a recipe that implies that all the problems are solved like this because this is the solidarity response. That's not how it works. Whenever there's a need, there will be different responses, different issues that they will cover. And they help learn that other virtue, that is a respect for diversity. But also the demand to find my own identity vis-a-vis solidarity. What is my way of practicing solidarity? And that lies in each of us, in our lives, how we stand in our lives in this issue. And that diversity presented by solidarity opens us to this kind of situation that in a way are vocational in the vital meaning. Not speaking of vocational training, but how you shape your own life and where you want to go. That is a decision that is assumed by each student based on this wealth of experiences that this methodology will offer. On the other hand, and this is the second part of my presentation, according to my schedule, I have 8 minutes to go. My dear Sebastián, I have a watch here that is indicating me the time. So let me tell you now that I think that solidarity also has to be thought of in these new, different times we are living in. Because solidarity is not the same for any situation. It is situated. So some questions come up that I think are important. One of them that is very difficult to answer is it possible to exercise solidarity in times of confinement and lockdown? And this is not a purely theoretical question, because the problem is that there's like a vital feeling that many people are feeling, that there's a relationship between physical contact and solidarity. So this concern, and I have this not now these days, but because today Axel was saying at the beginning, he was speaking about the pedagogy of exceptionality, and I've just written something that what appeared at the beginning as a time of exception is now becoming a long-term prospect of a time of uncertainty. Josep also mentioned that in his presentation. We are facing times of uncertainty, and in these times of uncertainty, we have to find a way to implement, both individually and from organizations and also from the governments, we have to implement solidarity. And there we see that without solidarity, it would not have been possible to respond to what happened in these times and what we're going through right now. In our country, Josep, Lynn, for you to know, now we have thousands of soup kitchens because of the number of people that cannot afford for food. Now, most of the Argentine population is falling below the poverty line, and that is only being stopped by the social policies, the solidarity, as a result of which many people are receiving resources. Around 9 million people are receiving this assistance, these funds, in order to buy food. So that is structural solidarity. I would call it that way. So I think that it's key for us to think, as Puig also mentioned, how we train in that solidarity that sustains this society today. Because what is sustaining society is that feeling of solidarity. So it's urgent now, and I agree with Puig, it's urgent now. This is not an option for the educational system, and let alone for some of us. And the school right now has emphasized the idea of maintaining the link. Some say the pedagogical link. And that connection is very closely related to solidarity. So right now, what is at stake is that tension between being or having solidarity or responding to individual interests. Individual interests that some have tried to save themselves, forgetting about the others. So service learning cannot be foreign to that tension right now, because we are educating for solidarity and not to be individualistic. So let me finish, Sebastián, by reminding you, as we cannot and we don't want to be neutral, you will excuse me, or perhaps you will be happy with me by remembering at the end of my presentation Father Julio Cini, that has just passed away. And I want to remind this priest from Corrientes, a relentless worker and poet and very engaged, by reading some of his poems. He said something that when I was a teenager, when I went to school, when I did service learning, but as a student, these verses were inspirational for me, for Nieves, that I've known since those days. Julian used to say in a song, it goes like this: how sad it must be to be old with your soul and your hands not being worn out. That sad reality of our skin that never put itself at stake for the others. It must be so sad to have everything when there are so many that sell themselves for a piece of bread. How sad this loneliness that is born from inequality. That's why I'm here singing. That's why I'm here dreaming. I think that is why, and for all those reasons, we're all here together. Thank you so much to all of you.
Thank you, Alberto. Thank you so much. I'm sure there will be hundreds of hands clapping for Axel, Joseph, Lynn, and Alberto, because you have been really brilliant in your messages. I was wondering, what is the role of institutions and organizations in so uncertain times? I'm sure that those of us listening to you are thinking about educating in values that will enable the future generations to build a different world, to be more service-oriented. Service learning is a good opportunity for us to go back to our vocation, our calling as workers providing service to others. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Thank you.